Tech. In this video series, I will cover the administration of Windows Server 2022 in detail. This is the class number 2, and in this class I will discuss the terminology related to the domain controller and Active Directory. So let's begin our class. So first of all, we will discuss the role services and features. What are the roles? A role is a set of software programs that, when they are installed and properly configured, lets a computer perform a specific function for multiple users or other computers within a network. For example, we have a role in our server and operating systems which is called DHCP. So in DHCP, we assign the IP automatically of our clients. So basically this is a role. Same wise we have a role of DNS server or web server or DB server. So these are called the roles. And the other part of the roles is role services. Role services are the software program that provides the functionality of a role. When you install a role, you can choose which role services the role provide other users and computer in the enterprise. So role services are basically the individual part of the roles, basically which support the role services. And the features, a software program that, although are not directly part of the role, can support or augment the functionality one or more role to improve the functionality of the server regardless of which role all installed. Basically features are the smallest part of the role services which compose the role services, and role services compose the role. So I will explain it with the help of example, so you can easily understand what is the role, what is the role services, and what is the feature. So here I have a example of role and feature. Suppose we have a family called Simpson's family. In Simpson's family we have a father and mother. So there are some responsibilities of fathers and some responsibilities of mother. So father is a role, but its responsibility is called role services. For example, father have to send their kids to school, and father feed their mother feeds their kid. Same like mother making food or cooking food for their children. So these services are called role services. Mother and father is a role, and their services is called role services. To perform these services, we need some objects, like for sending kids to school we need a car. So car is a feature which helps the role services to perform some kind of roles of father and mother. Same like lawn mower is a feature which is used for cleaning or cleaning the lawn. Same like utensils or kitchen utensils are the features, and cooking is the role services. So when you talk about in the terms of Windows, you have certain roles, and these role contain some role services, and these role services contain some feature. So I will explain you this in my future video, how to install role services and feature. So let's move to the next slide. So there is some basic terms used in Windows 2022 administration. The one is called domain. Domain, what is the domain? In general language, domain is the area of territory owned or controlled by ruler or government. Basically, domain is like a country, like a country where someone rule the country. Likewise, in the computer world, we have a certain type of security boundary which is called our domain. And for controlling this territory and rights of this domain, we use a computer called domain controller. So basically the domain is a kingdom of resources. Domain controller controls the major group of services such as like AD for Active Directory. Basically user authentication. These are the services I will explain and explain you in detail in my future video. For example, user activation, DNS, print service, file sharing service, file application service, DHCP Windows time service. So don't worry if you don't understand these terms. I will explain in my future videos. The second term is domain controller versus Active Directory. Domain controller is a main server that serve Active Directory services. Basically, domain controller is a server, which provide the services of Active Directory, which control the user authentication, user permission, user computers, and like all the related object in our Windows domain environment. So domain controller installation, if you install a domain and if you install the domain controller without a role, it is like you can open a company, but it is useless if you do not provide any product or service. So we should install first a domain controller, then we should install domain roles and services. Otherwise, its domain is useless for us and our users. You will need a role service to install on domain controller. So I will explain you in my future video how to install a role in a domain controller environment. Same, what is Active Directory? Active Directory is the one of the primary service role of domain controller. When we install domain controller, as you will see, I will install the first role and services, which is called Active Directory. Basically, what is the Active Directory? It is store the information about object on the network. Object mean users, computers, share folder, printers, and make this information available to the users and network administrator. ADDS, we also call Active Directory Domain Services. In short, we call it ADDS, uses domain controller to give the network user access to the permitted resources anywhere on the network through a single login process. In domain environment, you do need to have each login account on each computer. You have one account, and and domain administrator give you the rights and permission how to access domain resources like printers, shared folder. So we will discover all these things and configuration in our coming videos. So don't worry about this. I will show you the whole administration of Windows Server 2022. If you are new in this field, don't worry, I will cover each and everything. This is the very fundamental course, and this is also especially designed for beginners which don't know these terminology. That's why I cover this terminology in this video. Otherwise, I will skip this for the advanced user trainings. So Active Directory prerequisite is for installing Active Directory, you should have a DNS. DNS, I will explain it in my video. What is DNS? And static IP address. Basically, there are two types of IP address, which is one is called static and one is called dynamic. Static IP address is never changed, and dynamic IP address change whenever we reboot the computer. Same wise, we should choose a domain name like mylab.dc.local, and we should choose the NetBIOS name, which is called lab in my case. So what is domain naming service? We also call it, in short, we call it DNS. Sometimes it is also known as domain name service. Sometimes it is called domain name system or server. Basically, what this service does is provide the mechanism of host name to conversion of host name to IP address. So, most of the time they convert your host name into IP address, and sometimes you also use it to convert your IP address to host name. And some rare time you also use to change the host, it convert to host name to host name. For example, everyone have a nickname. For example, if you have a name of Salman, your father may be call you Salman, Sallu. So that's is the host name. So this is the function of the DNS, which is also convert your host name to host name. In computer world, we call it alias or conical name, CNAME. CNAME means we have single machine or server which have two names. So this functionality is provided by us with the domain controller. So I will explain you in my future when I will cover the domain name services or domain name server. So how does the domain works? So domain name service is like when you type, for example, you have a laptop and you type website called fullpower.com index.html. So what your computer do, what your browser do, it will go first for your DNS server and ask the IP address of foobar.com. So in return, your DNS server gives the IP address of the web server of the foobar.com, and then you have IP address, then you directly query the request to the poolbar.com for index.html for web server, and then you got the response. But normally the user didn't know this procedure because it is very fast and it will take no time. So this is the base, a very fundamental concept of the DNS server. So when we create a domain, when we create the first domain in our environment or our company, we should first create a forest. What is the forest? Forest is the first domain controller in your organization. We always create the first domain controller and we start our administration from there. So for example, in this picture I will show you nuggetlab.com is my first domain controller, and it contains the objects, AD objects like users and computers and organization unit. And below this is also called a root domain, and below this I will create another domain which is called the tree domain or child domain. For example, in my case I have created the root domain east.nuggetlab.com, west.nuggetlab.com. So the other one, the upper one is called our root domain, and the lower one is called our child domain. So basically nuggetlab.com is our root domain. So we will create the subdomain or child domain or tree because ease of our administration. So we will easily administration or delegate our subdomains to our network admin or some technician or whatever we want to give this domain level. I will when I create this domain, so I will explain this in my demo class. So there are three types of domain controllers. Basically domain controllers are three types. One is called domain controller. Domain controller is the master domain controller which have Active Directory, which have all the information related to your domain. But if something goes wrong with my domain controller, so in this case I will also create an additional domain controller which is called ADC. Basically ADC is nothing but a replica or copy of the domain controller. So the primary reason for having multiple domain controller in our is for fault tolerance. For example, if our primary domain controller is down, I will serve my user with the help of ADC. They will replicate Active Directory information between them and can provide services if the other is unavailable. So they can exchange their information. The domain controllers are exchanging their information, and we call it replication in the computer world. Or they serve each other if there is any disaster recovery. If DC is down, then we have a ADC in our environment. I will recommend you should have at least two domain controller in your environment. One is your primary domain controller or domain controller, and other one is called your ADC, which is also known as additional domain controller. So they can exchange their information every time, every 5 to 6 seconds, and this process is called replication, as you can see from the picture. So there is another type of domain controller which is called read-only domain controller, and in short we call it RODCs. So basically what it does, basically we design this type of hierarchy or domain structure when we have a branch office where we don't have a security. Someone steal our servers from our premises and take the ownership of the computer physical. They can access the physically our server. So in this case we create a domain controller which is the read-only copy of our actual domain controller. So if someone hack the accounts and trying to change the password, they don't able to change their activity because this is the read-only copy. I will explain you how to configure this type of domain controller. So say there are three types of domain controller. One is called DC, other one is called ADC, and third one is called RODC. So replication service. So I will cover this remaining terminology in my second video of this part. So till then,